Next, the computer map. Did you work on a computer map with the accused?
Yes, we did. It was actually at a time prior to this, as I recall, the course of the negotiations. It had to do with the corridor connecting the Bosnian Muslim-held enclave of Gorazda with the bulk of the territory that was to be held by the Bosnian Muslims and by the Federation. And President Milosevic came in, we looked at the terrain from various angles, and we discussed the high ground and how much terrain would have to be surrendered to the Federation to be able to protect a road, a sovereign road out to Gorazda.
His level of knowledge when dealing with this issue and this computerized map?
He seemed very familiar with the road, the terrain, and the ability to draw the lines in the right place. I remember discussions about the specific area just south of Sarajevo and that road, and he was not unfamiliar with this piece of ground.
At the end of Dayton, did the American delegation intend the Bosnian Serb leaders to initial the agreement? And if so, what was the accused's attitude as to who should be signing?
Well, it was the intent that everyone would signal their intent, their agreement with the final document. But the Bosnian Serb delegation did not sign, and President Milosevic indicated that his initials were adequate, that he would produce the Bosnian Serb's signature later.
Going back to the computerized map, help us with this. In dealing with that map, did he turn to the Bosnian Serbs for any assistance? Or?
No, he did not.
Moving beyond Dayton to 1997, was there an incident involving S4 troops who had been placed at a television antenna to guard it, indeed?
Yes, there was. There was a period of struggle around the city of Birchko, in which NATO troops ended up on top of a piece of high ground. It so happened there was a television antenna there. We continued to occupy that antenna. One morning, a mob showed up. President Milosevic had previously told me that any time there was trouble, just call him and he could handle it. I called him. I said, you're going to have to get the mob out of there. They're threatening our troops, and if you don't pull them back, we'll take other actions. He said, well, no, this is just political. I said, no, it's not political. This is a threat against the troops. It seemed that within a half hour or so, the mob disappeared.
You addressed him. Was it regular for you to address him or to think of addressing him? Was there anybody else to address apart from him for a problem like this?
It was clear that he still had extraordinary influence, if not control. It was never clear how much, but he had always said that if there was a difficulty, call him, and I did.
Paragraph 15 of the statement serving as a summary. And now turning to Kosovo. On the 15th of October of 1998, did you, together with Javier Solana, General Naumann, fly to Belgrade to meet the accused for the purpose of getting signatures for an agreement about NATO overflight and verification?
Yes, I did.
Were you also going to deal with the proposed pullback of VJ and MUT forces from Kosovo?
Yes, we were.
You met the accused in Beli Dvor. By whom was he accompanied?
To the best of my recollection, he was accompanied by Milutinovic and Perisic.
How long did the meeting last?
Perhaps 3 hours.
And was the upshot of that, that in due course the agreement was signed, and we have that at tab? Oh.
Yes, the air verification agreement was signed.
You can find that at tab 5 in the bundle. Sorry, tab 6, beg your pardon. Let's look at that, please. Now, when dealing with this, did the accused ask Javier Solana when the NATO Actord would be cancelled?
Yes, the accused was quite anxious to have the NATO Actord canceled. And he did ask that question.
Very well. Did that lead to a discussion or indeed an argument between him and Solana?
Yes, it did, because Secretary General Solana made it clear that the Actord couldn't be canceled until there was compliance with the UN directives that directed the pullback of the excessive forces that had been deployed in Kosovo since February of 1998.
How consistent or otherwise was the accused's approach to Secretary General Solana?
Well, it wasn't consistent. I mean, at first he had denied that he'd made such an agreement. Then he denied that there were any excessive forces there or any new forces that had been deployed since that period. And then confronted with the evidence, he then relented and agreed to pull those military forces back that we had mentioned.
You spoke to him directly on the basis of information that you had, and at that time he was accompanied by General Perisic, I think.
That's right. When he denied that there were any additional forces in there, I simply said, well, Mr. President, have you heard of the 211th Armored Brigade? We were speaking English. He said, no, I've not heard of such a unit. He then turned and spoke to General Perisic in Serbo-Croatian, and Perisic answered him, and then Milosevic turned back looking unhappy and said, all right, there is such a unit. And it went this way for several different units and each one he subsequently agreed to pull out. It was a grudging acceptance. It wasn't an acceptance of pulling out of the excessive units. It was an acceptance of whatever you name, we'll pull back.
Did General Perisic take a part in revealing the accuracy of your information for just the one example, the 211th, or was he taking a similar role in relation to other information you provided?
He confirmed the accuracy of the other two units that we'd provided.
And was one of those matters you raised a police unit?
It was, but in this case, this wasn't an Army unit, and so General Perisic did not confirm it. And President Milosevic tried to say this wasn't a unit, it was a precinct, or words to that effect.
And did Perisic correct him on that?
Perisic wasn't able to correct on that, and we were left then with the issue of how many police were there and what was the increased strength of the police. And at that point, President Milosevic promised that he would send us that information and give us a full accounting of the police elements that were in there.
Very well. My oversight in relation to an earlier matter on paragraph 14, very briefly, let's cover that. In the summer of 1997, did you have a conversation with Biljana Plavšić where she told you something that had been said to her by the accused about Stanisic? Just tell us about that, please.
I did have a conversation with Biljana Plavšić, and she said that Milosevic had offered to provide security for her through Stanisic, and she rejected that offer of security.
Thank you very much. And let's pick up the story at paragraph 18 of the statement, serving as summary. Your next meeting on the 20th of October, when you returned to Belgrade to discuss
I was raising paragraphs 27 to 28. You may want to look at those again. But you can look at them over the adjournment.
look at them in the sense that
Yeah.
querying whether
Yeah. Mistake was mine. I was getting ahead.
So on the 20th of October, you returned to Belgrade to discuss MUP data that had been delivered by the FRI, and I think it was your intention to press further for the withdrawal of forces. Is that correct, General?
That's correct. This was a time in which we had to work an agreement to pull back the forces in compliance with the UN Security Council resolution. And I spoke with President Milosevic. I asked that his generals cooperate in doing this. We had a full disclosure by the military and the police of what they believed to be the KLA dispositions and where their own forces were, at least where the military forces were. The
I can
police
deal with that.
dispositions still weren't quite complete.
And we deal with that in just a second, but before we do, the composition of the meeting and the function of the people attending, was the accused accompanied by Milutinovic, but also by a more personal advisor?
Yes, he was accompanied by Milutinovic and, as I recall, by Goran Milinovic.
Tiny detail, the man Milinovic, what did he do in this or in any other meetings that you saw him at? What service or function did he appear to provide?
Milinovic was present at almost every meeting we ever had with Milosevic. He seemed to be the chief of staff. He was the note taker. He was the man who listened, who monitored, who, I guess, ensured that the directions given by Milosevic were implemented.
But he did make notes.
Seemed to make notes. I recall him having a notebook and a pen there.
Before we come to what it's going to be Georgievich and Perisic were able to tell you, was there at one stage a private meeting between you and the accused where you walked to an adjoining room and spoke to him about what he should do?
Yes, there was.
Tell us about that, please.
When I began the meeting with President Milosevic on the 20th of October, there didn't seem to be a spirit of cooperation. And in front of his advisors, he seemed to be wanting to, again, backtrack and refuse to pull forces out and so forth. I asked him to step aside. I spoke to him one-on-one, and I warned him that if he didn't comply with the requests of the United Nations, that action would be taken against him in the form of bombing.
His response?
Well, his response was at first to shrug this off, and then on reflection, he decided that he would cooperate. He said he'd tell his generals to cooperate.
By his response, did he indicate the ability to control his generals or not?
He certainly indicated the ability to control his generals. Absolutely, no question about it.
Turning now then to Georgievich and Perisic, and in that order, when you spoke to Georgievich, was there a map available?
Yes, we laid out a map in a room off the president's office there. And General Georgievich went through the map in some detail, pointing out the location of each of the KLA remnants that were there.
Also present at this meeting, do you remember who else was present?
General Perisic was there also, and then he began to talk about the military dispositions that were present.
Before we come to that, can you remember who else was present? Doesn't matter if you can't at the moment.
I had with me some staff members. I had my political advisor, Mike Durkee, Staff Assistant Colonel Dennis Domingo, the intelligence officer, Brigadier General Glenn Schaefer, and as I recall, somewhere in this meeting also a Major General Lukic came in, another MUP officer.
In the course of your discussion with Georgievich and in the marking of the map, was it possible to count the number of alleged KLA people concerning Georgievich?
Yes, we added up these numbers, and they totaled 410 KLA, according to Georgievich's analysis.
Did you raise that with him? And if so, tell us what he said.
Well, I certainly did. I said that that you forced, words to the effect of you forced 350,000, 400,000 people out of their homes. You're trying to destroy the province to get at 400 people. And he said, we were within 2 weeks of killing them all. He said, why did you stop us? And I said, because you're targeting a civilian population, and it's creating a humanitarian catastrophe for your own people.
Very well. Did you say anything further about the appropriateness or otherwise of using force?
Well, I made it clear that that wasn't appropriate. It was illegal, against the law. It's not done.
Now let's turn to Perisic, who of course you'd recently seen being slightly counter to the accused in his fulsome answers, or more fulsome answers, about troop dispositions, hadn't you?
Mm-hmm.
What happened with him on this occasion?
Well, he pointed out the military locations, and he discussed the size of the units that were out there, and so I had a very good feel for the military dispositions and also how they were deployed tactically after I finished the discussion with General Perisic.
And by way of an example, how full was his information when he identified a tank?
Well, it seemed to be he was very forthcoming, I would say. Well, we saw a couple of tanks here, and he would say, yes, that's a company. Or I said, so if we saw a dozen vehicles here, he'd say, yes, that's a battalion. So it indicated that we were only seeing a small portion of the total size of the force that was actually there.
Was his approach for the army similar to or different from the approach of Georgievich for the MUP?
He seemed to be very forthcoming in terms of the discussion of the issues.
Did this meeting result in any pullback? If so, complete or partial?
This meeting resulted in a plan for a partial pullback of some forces around Militiava, a sort of a phase one of a pullback.
And did this lead to another meeting 4 days later on the 24th, this occasion General Naumann being present?
I took this partial pullback plan. I warned them at the time that I didn't have any authority to negotiate anything for NATO. I took it back to NATO. I said NATO is going to take a look at it, at all the information you've given, and then we'll see what happens. And so it turned out that General Naumann and I were sent back on the 24th of October.
Who was present at this meeting?
At this meeting, we first began with President Milosevic, and there was Milutinovic there, Shinovich, Perisic, and others.
Meeting started when and lasted how long?
It went, the initial meeting went around 5 o'clock, and for maybe an hour.
What was your and Klaus Naumann's objective?
Well, the idea was to get a real pullback of all the forces and comply with the UN Security Council resolution. We had a NATO act order in place. There was a time deadline we were working against here. And we wanted to say in very direct terms to President Milosevic that this was the time that he must pull these forces back.
At one stage, did Perisic organize a quiet meeting with you, or a private meeting with you?
Yes, what happened was that Milosevic said, well, you'll have to go back and continue to work this with these generals. So we went to Perisic first, and Perisic said, we're the only, he went through the disposition. We talked about how many forces could be pulled back reasonably. And, but he said that only President Milosevic could give the authority to pull these forces back. And he warned us, and he asked me, he said, please do not destroy the Yugoslav military. He said, this is the last democratic institution in Yugoslavia.
When he said that, had he made arrangements about the number of people present to hear him speak?
Yes, he had. He made sure everybody else was out of the room except for the interpreter.
And as a result of this, did you have hopes that you might accelerate the negotiations?
That seemed to be a promising attitude, but on the other hand, we recognized that Milosevic had total control of what was going to be decided.
Did you then make a decision as to whether you were going to achieve a full pullback or whether you needed to take things further with the accused?
At that point, it was clear that we'd gotten as far as we were going to get with Perisic, and so we decided to go back and see Milosevic and his team.
On this occasion, was this again back at Bely Dvor? On this occasion, were others present, some you meeting for the first time?
Well, Shinovich was there. That, as I recall, that's the first time I'd met Shinovich. The police people came in, and we assembled the whole group again. This must have been around 8 or 9 o'clock at night on that Saturday night, the 24th of October.
What was the accused's initial reaction at this part of the adjourned, or how you describe it, meeting?
Well, we said to the accused, essentially, he said, we didn't get any satisfaction here. This is not enough. And I said, General Naumann has an idea. And General Naumann and I talked about this previously. I turned to him. He said, you're going to have to pull these excess police back. Just pull them all back, Mr. President. That's the only way to solve this problem. That's the only way to get rid of the act order. All the excess police out. And Milosevic looked startled. And then he excused himself. He went back into another room with his team. They were in there for about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and then they came back into the meeting room with us. And Milosevic agreed in principle. And then he said, you'll have to continue the discussions now and work out the details of this.
With whom were you instructed to work out the details?
We went back at that point to the Serb Ministry of Defense, and as I recall, it was Foreign Minister Milutinovic, General Perisic, Georgievich, Lukic, and I think Shinovich was still there. He went in and out, as I recall.
Did those negotiations continue until the early hours of the following morning, the 25th of October, when you returned to see the accused at Bely Dvor?
That's right. These negotiations ended, I think, around between 4:30 and 5 o'clock on the morning of the 25th of January.
And you saw the accused at what time, roughly?
As I recall, it was around 9 o'clock. We had the results at that point. We cleaned up. I checked back in with headquarters, and so we went back around 9 o'clock.
And you were now in a position to require reduction of rather more than you'd originally identified as the number.
Well, the problem was, yes, that's correct, because General Naumann had given the number of excess police at 3,000. The correct number was 4,000, so we had to go in and see Milosevic. He said he wanted to make some changes in the agreement. We said, fine. We listened to him. We said, no, we want to make a change in the agreement. It's not 3,000 police, it's 4,000 police that have to be pulled out.
Did he accept that, or did he resist that?
With reluctance, he accepted that.
Did he attempt an argument about accepting more MUP presence?
Yes.
How did he base that?
Well,
I'm sorry.
he essentially said he wanted to stand on the original 3,000 figures. He said, where did you get the information of 4,000? I said, it came from your own documents. He had given us the documents as a result of the 15 October meeting.
The argument to have more MUP present, was that from Milosevic or from someone else?
We were only talking, as I recall the meeting, we were only talking to Milosevic at this point. There'd been discussion the previous night with Milutinovic about the numbers of MUP and whether they could be there and be out of uniform and so forth. But on Sunday morning, Milosevic presented his changes that he wanted. We considered them. We agreed to some of them. We explained the rationale for the document, and then we presented this change. We said, you're going to have to take 4,000 out, not 3,000 out.
During this part of the negotiations, did there come a time when the accused referred to historical events going back to 1946? And if so, from recollection, could you tell the court what it was he said and what effect it had on you.
We had achieved agreement, and then it remained to type up the agreement and get it signed. And so this must have been 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning or something, and President Milosevic was musing philosophically about this. And he turned to me and he said, General Clark, he said, we know how to handle these murderers, these rapists, these criminals. He said, we've done this before. I said, well, when? He said, in Drenica in 1946. And I said, what did you do? He said, we killed them. He said, we killed them all. I was stunned at the vehemence with which he spoke. And I just looked at him. General Naumann looked at him, as I recall. And Milosevic then said, then he qualified his statement. He said, we did not, of course, we did not do it all at once. It took some time.
Did you say how long it took?
He did, I don't recall him saying that.
The agreement being retyped as you, or typed as you've explained, when it was brought in for signature, what did you notice about those who were to sign?
That Milosevic, I noticed that Milosevic's name wasn't on the agreement.
Did you raise that with him? What was his
I did
reaction?
raise it with him. He said it wasn't necessary. I said, well, it is necessary, and asked him to sign it.
Did you indeed have to press him to sign it and explain the level of people that you typically dealt with in your negotiations?
I did have to press hard on this because it's been my experience in dealing with leaders in this part of the world and with President Milosevic. They typically didn't like to sign documents because it meant then that they could no longer disavow them. And I was determined that President Milosevic would sign this. We had negotiated it with him. He had the authority. And had he not signed it, my concern was that he would have then been able to say, well, I didn't really see this, and he would have been able to disavow it. So his signature on that document was very important because it represented his promises to NATO.
Well, this document has already been exhibited as Exhibit 94, tab 3. Perhaps it can just be laid on the overhead projector for the witness to see the way the signature was placed. Got it on the screen, I think, myself. I don't know if the judges do. Yes, there it is. Thank you. As we can see, no place on the typed version for the accused to sign. You and General Naumann required him to sign. Just show us where, please.
Right. This is the signature block. This was typed up in Yugoslavia, in Belgrade, there while I talked to Milosevic. And these were the signatures that he wanted on there. And this is what was typed on there. And of course, it had our names, General Naumann's name and my name on it. And then this is where he signed it at our insistence.
Thank you very much. And this documents the record of the meeting on the 25th of October of 1998. The matters agreed being set out in an attached statement. I turn to paragraph 30, the 20th of December of 1998. Did you go to Belgrade on this occasion to meet a person new to you, Colonel General Ojdanic?
I did. We knew that Perisic was in trouble, and based on the atmospherics of the meetings in October, I was not surprised that he was replaced by General Ojdanic, and I wanted to be certain that General Ojdanic understood the obligations that Yugoslavia had accepted through the Milosevic document.
Who else was present on this meeting?
Well, Mr. Shinovich was there. Apparently, I wasn't going to be allowed to meet with General Oidnich without Mr. Shinovich being present.
At the time, what was your judgment about this? What did it say about the level of confidence or trust reposed in Odanich?
It said that Oidnich he wasn't sufficiently trusted to meet alone with me with the interpreters present, that he needed the political guidance of Mr. Shinovich.
Did you raise with Odanich the presence of VJ tanks north of Pristina near Podujevo?
Yes, at that point we'd already seen the evidence of the violation of Milosevic's commitments to NATO. They'd already been deploying tanks north of Pristina along the main line of communication near Podjevo. And I raised this with General Oidnich. And he said, well, it was a training mission. Well, these weren't training missions. And under the agreement, they would have had to be notified in advance. And they weren't.
In giving his answer to you, did he speak without assistance, or did he discuss the matter at all first with Shinovich?
Each answer that he gave me was first coached with Shinovich, or cleared with Shinovich.
You made an assessment of Odanich. I don't know whether you made it there and then at this meeting or later, but what was your assessment?
Well, I thought he was a placeholder, someone ambitious enough to want the job, and maybe someone who wouldn't ask too many of the tough questions that had gotten General Perisic in trouble.